Hello, welcome to Employment Law class. Today we look at Section 6 of Unit 6, which is on vicarious liability. This is one of the interesting areas in tort law. Session objectives. By the end of this session, you should be able to define and explain what is meant by vicarious relationship. Identify the two main types of relationship that can be affected by vicarious liability. Vicarious liability is a legal concept that assigns liability to an individual who did not actually commit or cause the harm, but who had specific superior legal relationship to the person who did the harm. Basically, what we are saying is that the issue of vicarious liability arises when a principal appoints an agent to work for him. So in the course of the agent working for the principal, if the agent causes injury to a third party, then the principal who appointed the agent should be held liable. So it is where one person is held liable for the tort of another, even though the person did not commit the offense or the act itself. So let's say A being the principal, B being the agent, C being a third party. So A appointed B as a driver to carry goods from Tema to Takoradi. Along the line, B drives and he hits C on the way. C is injured, but he didn't die. Now, C will hold A responsible under vicarious liability because B was working in or performing the authorized work of his boss, who is A. So under the principle of vicarious liability, C will sue A. The reason is that he who appoints another person to do an act, a specific act, is presumed that he is the person doing it. And the reason why C will sue A, or sometimes C can sue A and B jointly and severally, so that when he gets judgment, he can attack any of them. But mostly, the principal is the one who will be responsible. The essence is that the principal here controls the acts of B, or A has bigger pockets as compared to B. Now let's come to employer/independent contractor. The general rule is that an employer is not liable for the tort of independent contractor except in the following cases. So independent contractors are those contractors in which the employer has no control over the way they do their work. So in that instance, the employer will not be liable, but rather the independent contractor. Let's look at some cases. Strict liability under the rule of Rowlands and Fletcher, which say that a person who, for his own purpose, brings on his land and collects and keeps there anything likely to do mischief. If it escapes, must keep it at his peril, and if does not do so, is prima facie answerable for all the damage which is the natural consequence of its escape. Now, what this rule is saying is that, look, for instance, if you go and bring petrol or gas in your room, in the natural circumstance, the gas should not be there. When you bring it there, you have the duty to ensure that the gas will not explode to cause harm. If you fail to ensure that it is in proper manner in which it is not likely to escape, then on the face of it, you'll be held responsible for any damage that will occur in case the gas explodes. Now, where the employer was negligent in the hiring of independent contractor, we said that for independent contractor, the employer will not be liable. But under this circumstance that we are discussing, the employer will be responsible. For instance, if the employer in hiring the independent contractor, you hire an incompetent person, or you are negligent and you hire incompetent person, and damage is caused, the employer will be held liable. Also, where the duty is personal, for example, an employer has a duty to provide employees with reasonable, safe, prompt, and system of work. If he employs a contractor in the discharge of his duty, he remains liable for any negligence by the contractor. So you have a duty to provide that's working materials for the work. If you leave all those to contractor and the person provides fake materials for the work, you will be responsible. Now let's look at vicarious liability in employer-worker relations. You should understand that an employer is vicariously liable for the thoughts of his servant that are committed in the course of his work. So the key word that you have to understand is that the person must perform the work or in the course of his employment. It means that if the employee is not acting in the course of his employment, his employer will not be responsible. A master is not responsible for a wrongful act done by his servant unless it is done in the course of his employment. So you see, the master will not be responsible unless the work is done in the course of his employment. It means that the employer or the master will only be responsible only if his servant or employee is working in the course of his employment. Now, it is deemed to be so that if it is so, you're looking at what we mean by in the course of employment. 1. A wrongful act authorized by the master. If the master authorized a wrongful act and the employee does same, the person is deemed to be in the course of his employment. A wrongful and unauthorized mode of doing some act authorized by the master. The master has given you work to do, but you have used a wrongful and unauthorized mode in doing the work. The master, you will still be deemed that you are in the course of employment, and the master will be held liable. In the case of Garden Royal Exchange Assurance Ghana Limited, we appear 1984 to 86, 1 Ghana Royal Report 52. Now, in this case, a driver who is Ofori had a duty to take a car from garage for washing. Now, on that day, Ofori took the car with the aim of going to wash. Now, along the line at Nsewom, he knocked down someone and the person died. Now, an action was brought against the employer for the injury or death caused by Ofori, who is his employee. Now, the argument of the employer was that, in fact, Ofori was told to go and wash the car, so he doesn't know what he was doing at his home. The court did not accept that explanation. The court of the view that since Ofori has a duty to drive the car to go and wash, it doesn't matter wherever he was going to wash the car. And at the time that the injury or the accident occurred, he was acting in the course of his employment. Therefore, the negligent acts caused by Ofori, the employer, was held liable. So it was held that since Ofori was authorized by his employer to take the car out and wash it, Ofori was left to his discretion as to where and how the job was to be done. The employer therefore held liable for the negligent acts of the driver. So the employer was held liable for the negligent acts of the driver. So this is how vicarious liability operates. Once the person is working in the course of his employment, the employer will be held liable. The tortious act must be a wrongful way of doing what the employee is employed to do. So in Nimbus v. London General Omnibus, a bus driver was racing a bus caused an accident. His employer was held liable because he was doing what he was employed to do. What he was employed to do is what? Driving the bus, although in an improper manner. So when you conduct your work in an improper manner, so your employer could be held responsible. An act of violence by an employee does not make the employer liable. So for this one, when it comes to act of violence, you are employed to drive. You are not employed to beat passengers. So the employee will be liable, not the employer. An employee may be within the course of his employment even though he acted fraudulently. That in the case of Lloyd v. Grace and Smith, the court has established that indeed, look, an employee working in the course of his employment but acts fraudulently will still be held liable. A typical example would be the banking system. So in the case of McKean v. Rona Brothers, an employer who wrongfully uses his own property to carry his job may still be within the course of his employment. So if you use your own property, for example, if you use your own car to carry your duty as a driver, or you use your property to carry your course of the work that you have been employed to do, your employer could still be held liable. Now, if an employer provides vehicle for the employee's use, the employer may be regarded as an agent of the employer if he gives another employee a lift, even though it is not within the course of his employment to do this. So we are looking at the fact that the employer has given vehicle to one of his employees for use in the work. An employee has also given another employee lift if any injury caused. So even though It is not within his course of employment to do that. Now let's consider this case. In the case of a Wisdom Attorney General, when an employee who is on a journey deviates from his authorized route, it is a question of degree whether he has started a fresh journey, that's a foreign of his own, which will leave the employer from liability. So let's try and discuss this case. It's an interesting case. Now, in a Wisdom Attorney General, this is what happened. A woman who was a poultry farmer was going to Accra. He was coming from Cape Coast. A policeman who was driving a jeep collected a fee from him with the aim of taking her to Accra, since he was also going to Accra. On their way, accident occurred because the driver was going at a higher speed. This woman then brought action against the Attorney General. Her case was that, look, at the time the policeman was driving, he was acting in his course of business. Attorney General argument was that, look, the policeman has been assigned to drive an officer within Accra, so they don't know what he was actually doing at Cape Coast. Now the court has to give a ruling. The court indicated that a policeman, first, he was authorized to drive in Accra. 2, he was not employed as a driver who would be taking people from one place to the other with the aim of collecting money. Now you could see that the man or the policeman was doing his own work. So the court ruled that, in fact, the policeman, who is the employee for the government, is on his foreign of his own. It means that he was doing his own personal stuff. So Attorney General, who was representing the government, be the employer. So the employer or the government of Ghana was said to not be liable for the accident caused by the policeman. So the proper person who would be liable is the policeman. So this is how vicarious liability works. It is very interesting. So when you are employing someone in your workplace, you have to be careful the kind of person you employ to work for you. By way of summary, we have attempted to explain what is meant by vicarious liability and the two types of relationship that can be affected by it. Thank you. Have a nice day.